Hello guys, gals and gamers, and welcome back to another video. Before we begin, I would love to remind you guys to please call your mother. You thought I was gonna say like and subscribe? Nah, calling your mother is more important. But before you call your mother, let's have a little discussion about video game movies. And this is definitely inspired by the Super Mario Brothers animated movie coming out, and I'm going to talk about that one a bit during this video. And in general, I think it's going to be an okay movie. I don't think it's going to be really that great, but it's just going to be an enjoyable an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. It's just going to be a fun time. It's not going to be high cinema. It's not going to be the next Citizen Kane. And I think that's just good enough, because video game movies, they are really hard to make, especially when going to the past, because video game movies did have kind of a rough beginning, and that's where I kind of want to start off this video, talking about like the history and kind of the attitude people have towards video games in general. And that has changed a lot, like even in the past 30-20 years. The overall like mainstream view on video game has changed quite a bit. In the early days, people just thought of us video games as something for kids, and that is definitely a stigma that still exists in some people. And a lot of the high executive like directors and everything in still Hollywood living, hopefully, they still carry this, like it's a different thing, it's for kids. I don't understand this medium that is new for them. I would go out and say that Hollywood doesn't really like video games. This opinion, of course, is fading, and there are other reasons to it than just thinking they are for kids. Another thing is that people just in general don't really seem to be welcoming of new mediums, especially if they take some medium very well, like highly regard some medium like Hollywood does for movies. Just look at like Oscars. Yeah, I know they're really boring and just dull, but just look at them. They are really pretentious, very snobby, really think highly of themselves. And not that it's a bad things, movies are great, but that comes also with like kind of looking down on some other forms of entertainment, especially if something newer comes and that is kind of a threat to what you're making, which I think video games are a bit to movies. Video games have already surpassed the revenue of like movie and music and TV shows in total or something like that. It's like completely absurd how popular and how much money video games make, so there is a little bit of that fear in there as well. But yeah, people don't really take it too kindly when it comes to new medium, and this is just not a Hollywood thing. This is just how people act in general. You can look back at history, you can see people who are like radio hosts saying like, nah, I don't think this picture radio is going to be a thing, it's just going to be a fad. And people would just come back to the radio because it has a lot of history and it has a lot of established content and everything already. So I don't think people are that keen on, the television. And even like going back to like ancient Greek, people thought about this, about like the written word. So I don't think that just spoken storytelling is going to be the thing going forward. I don't think people are so interested in writing things down, and that also makes like people very lazy, because then they don't have to remember so many things and blah blah blah. This is just how people act. Another thing with Hollywood and just in general a thing is that when you have that kind of an attitude that you don't really care about this medium, you just think about things as just, well, let's just try to make a profit. And that is unfortunately still a thing that really happens a lot of the time. Like video game movies are not made by people who are like very creative and passionate about adapting this video game into a movie. But again, I don't know much about it. This is just me observing things. I'm much more of a game creator than a movie person, so I could be wrong about this, but this is just something I feel like happening. There are definitely some things I have seen that are definitely executive decisions. For example, the original design for Sonic the Hedgehog in the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, which was alright, which it was a good film. But the original one, I guarantee you it was because some executive said, like, Sonic is too cartoony looking. I'm not sure if audiences would like that. But people really seem to like Rocket Raccoon from the what's the space Marvel movies, Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe is that called? Is it called that? I don't know. But people really like the Rocket Raccoon from that. So make Sonic look a bit more realistic, a bit more like a hedgehog. I think audiences would love that. And of course, audiences didn't love that because the executives are out of touch. Even if you get lucky and you're really passionate and you want to write a movie based on a video game, it is actually very hard to do that. Any adaptation is, hard to make. You can think about books. They are not easy just to copy paste and make into a movie, because in books there's a lot of like descriptions and internal dialogue that would not translate well to a movie. So you have to write around that and maybe change some things here and there. It's, a part of making an adaptation. But what makes video games difficult is, well, first of all, video games is a very unique medium in the way that it has the level of interactivity not seen in books or movies. In books or movies, you are usually the observer of things happening. While in video games, you are the guy who does things. You are the main character, not just looking at what the main character does. You control the main character. It is you. And it is very hard as a movie to really convey those feelings of being in control of the main character, the feelings of gameplay, the feelings that you get during gameplay. It is very hard to put that into film. So it is just hard. Another thing is that, well, there are loads of different kinds of video games. You have games like Tetris, which is a puzzle game, which doesn't really have like a lot of narrative. And then you have games like Persona 5, which has a lot more narrative, and even more narrative. So much that completing the game might take over 100 hours, and that is a lot to put into one movie. So there might even be too much narrative, and it's just hard to condense all of that into, say 2.5 hours. Probably might not work. I know there's a Persona 5 animation, but I also know that's not very good according to people. But yeah, it gets very hard. And games as well, aside from having loads of different genres like sports and fighting games and everything else that might be a bit harder to translate into a movie, games also have, even when it comes to narrative, a way different of a structure. Mario is level based. They go from plot to action to plot to action. Sometimes if it even has a lot of plot, sometimes it's just a level, and then some action, and then level. And movies are not like that. Movies usually have like a 3-act structure. Mario doesn't really have that. So it's kind of hard to put that into a movie. Again, it's really hard to adapt a video game movie. But when it comes to source material and looking at it, I think it is better to be faithful to at least the soul and some of the characters when it comes to adapting a video game. It doesn't really matter what you do with the story, and I think that is one of the strengths of adapting a video game, that you don't necessarily have to adapt a story. A lot of video game movies have done that. Like I mentioned previously, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog, the movie, is based on the video games, but can you point out which exact video game it is based on? Because it's not really based on a video game. Same with like Detective Pikachu. It is based on the Detective Pikachu video game, but it doesn't really follow the story that much, and it's more about a story that happens in the Pokemon universe. And even then, it takes a lot of liberties. For example, Pokemon battles and trading are a big deal in the mainline games, but in Pokemon Detective Pikachu, we don't really see any of that. There's like one scene where they have a Pokemon battle, and even then it's kind of portrayed as an illegal thing in the city. And, you know, the movie still works, but even if you happen to find like a good way of adapting with like the style and themes and the characters, it doesn't mean it is going to be a good movie, because even in those cases you still need a good story. And this I feel like Detective Pikachu was missing this quite a bit. Also the first Silent Hill movie, and especially going forward with Silent Hill movies, definitely like, okay, the theme and the characters were a bit there, and I can still recognize the video game there, and it's made in a cool way, but it's still not a good movie, because there's loads that goes into making a movie. And in this case, it's just, I think it's easier if you just don't commit to a story. Just have a movie with an original story, involve the creators if possible, hopefully it is possible, and just try to make an original story set in the world of the video game. Kinda have the themes, the world, and the characters, but have them do something different. Don't follow a set path, because that set path can be really difficult to, you know, put into a movie. I would love to see some sort of a movie based on Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, but looking at the structure, the gameplay aspects, and the length of that story, I think it would just come out as a mess. And this is where kind of my worries come for the Super Mario Brothers movie. I think it's gonna be a good movie. Like I said, it's gonna be an alright movie. It seems to rely a lot on the source material. It looks to be really faithful to the source material, which is always fun to see. But where it kind of falls down, I think it will fall down, is the story. I don't think it's going to be high cinema, but I am a bit afraid of the story aspect of it. But that's kind of where I'm worried, because even if you do a good adaptation, you still need a good story to tell. And I'm not sure if Super Mario Brothers, the movie, will have that, but I would be happy to be wrong. But what do you think about everything that I rambled about? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Are you working in the film industry? I would love to know what you think about this video. But I don't really have anything else to say now, so I will just see you guys next time. Bye bye.